She called her own daughter the big disappointment, but years later, when that same daughter walked back through the front door, everything had changed. If you believe that the people who try to break you don't get to define you, leave a like and comment where you're watching from, because this story is going to stay with you long after it ends. Apple never chose her name. Her mother did, and not out of love. Not because she thought her daughter was sweet or precious. No, she named her Apple because, as she put it, you were a mistake that fell too far from the tree. Those words were spoken before Apple could even understand them, but she grew up carrying their weight like stones sewn into her skin. From the very beginning, Apple was told she was too much, too big, too slow, too clumsy, too loud when she laughed, too quiet when she cried. There was no version of herself that ever seemed to be enough. Her mother, Diane, was a woman carved from ice and disappointment, beautiful in a sharp, cold way, thin, polished, always dressed like she was expecting someone important to walk through the door. She had dreams once, big dreams, but life didn't give her what she wanted. And somehow in her mind, Apple became the reason for every single thing that went wrong. If it wasn't for you, Diane would say, I could have had a career, a real life, a future. Apple heard those words so many times they stopped hurting. Or at least she told herself they did. She learned to shrink, to take up less space, to move through her own home like a ghost, hoping not to be seen. Because being seen meant being criticized. Being noticed meant being compared. And there was always someone to compare her to. Diane had a sister, and that sister had a daughter named Claire. Claire was everything Apple wasn't. Thin, graceful, popular, the kind of girl who walked into a room and made people smile just by existing. Every holiday, every family gathering, every phone call, Diane would find a way to remind Apple of the difference. Claire just got accepted into a top university. What are you doing with your life? Claire lost 5 pounds. Maybe you should try her diet. Claire has a boyfriend now. A real one. From a good family. Apple would sit in silence. Fork frozen over her plate. Appetite gone. Heart quietly breaking. She was 12 the first time she skipped a meal on purpose. 13 the first time she cried herself to sleep and couldn't stop. 14 the first time she looked in the mirror and genuinely hated what she saw. And Diane never noticed. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. But what hurt the most wasn't the cruelty. It was the silence that followed. The way Diane could tear her apart and then sit down to dinner like nothing happened. The way she never apologized, never softened, never once wrapped her arms around her daughter and said, I didn't mean it, because she always meant it. Every single word. Apple had a father once. A kind man with tired eyes and a gentle voice. He used to read her bedtime stories and tell her she was brave. But when Apple was 9, he left, packed a bag, kissed her forehead, and walked out the door. He promised to come back. He never did. And Diane made sure Apple knew who to blame. He left because of you, because you were too much to handle. Even your own father couldn't stand to stay. Apple believed her. For years, she believed every word. High school was a blur of loneliness and invisible wounds. Apple didn't have many friends. She wasn't bullied exactly. She was just overlooked, forgotten, the kind of girl people didn't remember when the yearbook came out. She would sit alone at lunch, headphones in, pretending to listen to music, but most of the time she was just staring at the table, replaying every insult her mother ever said, wondering if maybe she deserved them. And then one day, something inside her cracked. It wasn't a big moment. There was no dramatic confrontation, no screaming match, no shattered plates. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Apple was standing in the kitchen and Diane was going through the mail. Without even looking up, Diane said, You know, Claire is getting engaged. 22 years old, already has her life figured out. And here you are. Still living in my house. Still eating my food. Still a disappointment. Apple didn't respond. She just stood there frozen, heart pounding. But something had shifted. Something deep inside her finally broke free. That night she started packing. She didn't have much. A few clothes, some books, a small savings account she'd been building in secret for years. Money earned from odd jobs and summer work. It wasn't enough to start a new life, but it was enough to leave, and leaving was all that mattered. The next morning before Diane woke up, Apple walked out the front door. She didn't leave a note. Didn't say goodbye. She just left. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she could breathe. But what happened next would change everything. And not just for Apple. The first few months were the hardest. Apple had nothing. No job. No support. No one to call when things got bad. She slept on a friend's couch for a while, then rented a tiny room in a shared apartment with strangers. She worked double shifts at a diner, coming home with aching feet and grease-stained clothes. But she was free. And that freedom, even when it hurt, was worth more than all the comfort in the world. She started reading. Self-help books at first, then psychology, then business. She wanted to understand why she had believed the lies for so long, why she had let someone else's cruelty define her worth. And slowly, painfully, she began to rebuild. She joined a gym, not to become thin, not to prove anything to anyone, but because she wanted to feel strong. She wanted to take up space in the world without apologizing for it. At first, she could barely finish a workout. Her body ached. Her mind screamed at her to quit, but she kept going, day after day, week after week. And something started to change. Not just her body, though, that changed too. Her posture, her confidence, the way she walked into a room, the way she spoke to strangers, the way she looked at herself in the mirror. She didn't hate what she saw anymore. She started to see someone brave, someone who had survived, someone who was finally learning to love herself, not because she had earned it, but because she had always deserved it. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing, comment survivor right now, because this story is for you. Apple threw herself into work with a fire she didn't know she had. She started at the bottom, waitressing, retail, answering phones at a temp agency. But every job taught her something. Every setback pushed her forward. She saved every penny she could, took online courses at night, studied marketing, design, communication. She wanted to build something of her own, something no one could take away. And slowly, her plan started to take shape. She launched a small business, a consulting firm for women entrepreneurs. It wasn't glamorous at first, just Apple, a laptop, and a dream. But she poured everything into it, every late night, every rejection, every moment of doubt. And people started to notice. Her clients grew. Her reputation spread. Within 3 years, she had a team of 5. Within 5 years, she was being featured in magazines, invited to speak at conferences, recognized as a rising voice for women in business. Apple, the girl who was told she would never amount to anything, was becoming someone. Not because she had changed who she was, but because she had finally stopped believing the lies. She moved into a beautiful apartment, wore clothes that made her feel powerful, surrounded herself with people who lifted her up instead of tearing her down. And for the first time in her life, she was happy. But there was still a wound that hadn't healed, a door she hadn't opened, a voice in the back of her mind that whispered, what about her? Her mother. Apple hadn't spoken to Diane in years. No phone calls, no letters, no holidays. She had built an entire life without her, and part of her wanted to keep it that way. But another part of her, the part that still remembered being a little girl waiting for her mother to love her, couldn't let go. And then one day she got a phone call that changed everything. It was her aunt, Claire's mother, the one who had always looked at Apple with pity, like she was a broken thing that couldn't be fixed. Apple, she said, her voice strange and tight. It's about your mother. She's sick. Apple's heart stopped. What do you mean, sick? She's been diagnosed with something serious. The doctors aren't sure how much time she has left. She's been asking for you. Apple didn't respond. She couldn't. All those years of silence. All those years of distance. And now this. She's alone, Apple. She pushed everyone away. Even Claire doesn't visit anymore. You're the only one left. Apple hung up the phone and sat in the dark for a long time. She didn't owe Diane anything, she knew that. The woman had broken her in ways that still ached if she thought about them too long. She had every right to walk away, to protect herself, to never look back. But something inside her wouldn't let go. Maybe it was closure, maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the little girl who still lived inside her. The one who never stopped hoping her mother would change. Whatever it was, Apple made a decision. She was going back. The house looked smaller than she remembered. Apple stood on the sidewalk staring at the front door, heart pounding. She had walked out of this house 7 years ago, broken and invisible. Now she was standing here again. But everything was different. She was different. She took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened slowly, and there she was, Diane. But not the Diane she remembered. This woman was thin, but not in the polished way she used to be. Thin in a fragile way. Her hair was gray now, pulled back loosely. Her face was lined, her eyes tired. She looked like someone who had been fighting a battle she was slowly losing. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Diane's eyes moved over Apple, taking in the tailored coat, the confident posture, the calm expression, and something flickered in her gaze. Something Apple had never seen before. Fear. You came, Diane whispered. You asked for me. Apple replied. Diane stepped aside, and Apple walked into the house where she had once cried herself to sleep. Everything looked the same. The same furniture, the same photographs on the walls, though Apple noticed her own face was missing from most of them. The same cold, polished silence. But something had shifted. The house felt emptier now. Quieter. Like a museum no one visited anymore. Diane led her to the living room and sat down slowly. Like even that small movement cost her energy. You look different, she said. I am different. Diane nodded, her eyes dropping to her hands. I heard about your business. Saw your name in a magazine once. Claire showed me. Apple said nothing. I didn't believe it at first. Diane continued. I thought, that can't be her. That can't be my Apple. I was never your Apple. Apple said quietly. You made that very clear. The words hung in the air like smoke. Diane flinched, but she didn't argue. She just sat there, small and silent, like a woman who had finally run out of excuses. I know I wasn't a good mother, she said eventually. I know I said things, did things. I know I hurt you. You didn't just hurt me, Apple said. You broke me. You made me believe I was worthless. You made me hate myself for years. Do you have any idea what that does to a child? Diane's hands trembled. I was angry. At life. At your father. At myself. And I took it out on you. I know that now. Knowing isn't the same as fixing. I know. They sat in silence for a long time. Apple had imagined this moment so many times. The confrontation. The reckoning. She had pictured herself shouting, crying, finally saying all the things she had buried for years. But now that she was here, she didn't feel anger. She felt something else, something quieter. She felt pity, not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But pity. Because the woman sitting in front of her wasn't a monster. She was just a broken person who had broken someone else. And now she was alone. Why did you ask for me? Apple finally said. After all these years. Why now? Diane looked up. And for the first time, Apple saw tears in her eyes. Because I'm scared, she whispered. Because I pushed everyone away. Because I spent my whole life being angry and bitter and cold, and now I have nothing. No one. And I realized, too late, that the one person I hurt the most was the only one who ever really needed me. Apple's chest tightened. I don't expect you to forgive me, Diane continued. I don't deserve it, but I needed to see you. I needed to tell you that I was wrong, that you were never a disappointment, that you were the best thing I ever had, and I was too blind and broken to see it. The words hit Apple like a wave. She had waited her whole life to hear them. And now that they were here, she didn't know what to do with them. I used to dream about this, Apple said quietly. About you saying sorry, about you finally seeing me. But I don't need it anymore. I already know I'm not a disappointment. I figured that out on my own. Without you. Diane nodded, tears falling now. I know, and that's what scares me the most. You didn't need me to become who you are. You became amazing in spite of me. Apple felt something crack open inside her. Not forgiveness, but something close to peace. I'm not here to punish you, she said. And I'm not here to save you. I'm here because I needed to close this chapter. I needed to see you and know that I survived, that I'm whole, that nothing you said defines me anymore. Diane wiped her eyes. You're stronger than I ever was. I know. They sat in the quiet for a long time. Two women on opposite sides of a wound that would never fully heal. But for the first time, it didn't have to. The days that followed were strange. Apple didn't move back in. She stayed at a hotel nearby, visiting when she could, helping with appointments and errands. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something messier and more real. They talked. slowly, carefully, about the past, about the pain, about the things that couldn't be undone. And Apple learned something she hadn't expected. Diane had been broken too, not by her daughter, by her own mother, by a father who left when she was young, by a string of failures and disappointments that she never processed, never healed from, never spoke about. It didn't excuse what she had done. Nothing could, but it explained it. And for Apple, that was enough. She didn't owe Diane forgiveness. She didn't owe her love, but she could offer something smaller, something human. Presence. She could sit with her, listen, let her speak the truths she had buried for decades. Not because Diane deserved it, but because Apple had finally become the kind of person who could give without losing herself. And in those quiet moments, something unexpected happened. Apple started to let go, not of the pain, that would take longer, maybe forever, but of the anger, the resentment, the weight she had carried for so many years. She realized that holding on to it wasn't protecting her. It was keeping her tethered to a past she had already escaped, and she was ready to be free. One afternoon, Apple was sitting by the window, watching the rain, when Diane spoke. "I used to be jealous of you." Apple turned, surprised. "What?" Diane smiled sadly. "You had this light in you, even when you were little. This hope. This belief that things could be good. I didn't have that. I lost it somewhere along the way. And instead of protecting yours, I tried to put it out." Apple didn't respond. "But I couldn't," Diane continued. "No matter what I said, no matter how hard I pushed, you kept going. You kept believing. And that scared me. Because it meant you were stronger than me. It meant you would leave, and I would be left behind." Apple felt tears sting her eyes. "So I tried to keep you small," Diane whispered. "Because if you stayed small, you would stay. But you didn't. You grew anyway. You became everything I was afraid you would be. And I hated myself for it." Apple stood up slowly and walked across the room. She knelt in front of her mother and took her hands. "I don't hate you," she said. "I don't know if I love you, but I don't hate you, and I think that's enough for now." Diane broke down. Years of walls, years of coldness, years of silence, all crumbling at once. And Apple held her, not because she had forgiven her, but because she had finally forgiven herself, for needing a mother who couldn't be there, for wanting love that never came, for believing, even for a moment, that she wasn't enough. She was enough. She had always been enough, and now, she finally knew it. The weeks passed slowly. Apple stayed longer than she planned. Not out of obligation, but out of choice. She helped Diane get her affairs in order, sat with her during treatments, brought her soup when she couldn't eat, read to her when she couldn't sleep. It wasn't the childhood she had wanted, but it was something, a small, imperfect piece. And in those quiet moments, Apple found something she didn't expect. Closure, not the kind you see in movies, where everything is wrapped up neatly with a bow, but the real kind, the kind that hurts and heals at the same time, the kind that doesn't erase the past but makes room for the future. She started writing, journaling at first, then essays, then something longer, a memoir, a story about a girl who was told she was nothing and became everything anyway. She didn't write it for revenge. She wrote it for the other Apples out there, the ones still shrinking, still hiding, still believing the lies they were told. She wanted them to know that it was possible, that the voice in your head doesn't have to be the voice that wins, that you can rewrite your story, even when someone else wrote the first chapter. And when she finished the last page, she felt something lift off her shoulders, the weight she had carried for decades, the invisible burden of unworthiness, was finally gone. She was free. If this story has touched you in any way, comment "transformed" below, because that's exactly what Apple did. And so can you. The call came on a Thursday morning. Apple was at her apartment making coffee when her phone buzzed. She saw her aunt's name and already knew. Diane had passed in her sleep, peacefully, quietly, like she had finally stopped fighting. Apple didn't cry. Not right away. She sat down at her kitchen table and stared at the wall, letting the news settle into her bones. She thought about the little girl who used to wait by the window, hoping her father would come back. The teenager who cried in her room, wondering why she wasn't good enough. The young woman who walked out the front door with nothing but a bag and a broken heart. And she thought about now, about who she had become. about the life she had built, about the strength she had found in the ruins of everything she lost. Diane was gone, and with her, the last thread of the past. But Apple wasn't empty. She wasn't broken. She was whole. And that was the greatest victory of all. The funeral was small, a few distant relatives, a couple of neighbors. Claire came, but they didn't speak much. Too much history. Too many unspoken words. Apple stood at the front looking at the casket and felt a strange calm wash over her. She didn't give a eulogy. She didn't think she could find the words. But she did say something quietly, just to herself. I forgive you. Not for you, for me, so I can finally move on. And she meant it. After the service, Apple walked through the old house one last time. She stood in her childhood bedroom, now empty and bare. She remembered the nights she spent crying into her pillow, the mornings she woke up dreading another day, the years she lost to shame and silence. But she also remembered the moment she decided to leave. The first step out the door. The first breath of freedom. And she smiled, because that girl, the one who thought she was nothing, had become someone. Not despite the pain, but through it. Not by erasing the past, but by transforming it. She walked out of the house and didn't look back. She had her own life now. Her own story. Her own future, and it was beautiful. Months later, Apple's book was published. It was called The Girl Who Bloomed Anyway, a memoir about pain, resilience, and the long road to self-love. It became a bestseller. Thousands of women wrote to her, sharing their stories, thanking her for putting into words what they had felt their whole lives, telling her she had given them hope. Apple read every single letter, and every time she cried, not from sadness, from connection, from the realization that she wasn't alone, that her story had mattered. She started speaking at events, hosting workshops, building a community of women who were learning to love themselves for the first time. And every time she stood on stage, she remembered the girl she used to be, the one who was told she was too much, the one who believed she was nothing, the one who almost gave up. She spoke directly to that girl now. You made it, she whispered. You survived, and you became everything they said you couldn't be. One evening, Apple was sitting on her balcony watching the sunset, when her phone buzzed. It was a message from a young woman she had never met. I just finished your book. I'm 19. My mother says the same things yours did. I thought I was alone. But you showed me I'm not. Thank you for helping me believe I'm worth something. Apple stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, you are worth everything. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Your story isn't over. It's just beginning. She hit send and looked out at the sky, painted in shades of gold and pink. She thought about everything she had been through. The pain, the transformation, the quiet revenge of becoming whole when someone tried to break her, and she realized something. The greatest transformation wasn't physical. It wasn't the weight she lost or the success she gained. It wasn't the business or the book or the recognition. It was learning to love herself, even when the person who should have loved her most rejected her. That was the miracle. That was the victory. That was the ending she had written for herself. And it was everything. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another one. Every week we share real stories of strength, transformation, and hope. Comment below which part moved you the most. And share this with someone who needs to hear it today, because you never know whose life you might change.